I'm talking about elections, which get a lot of attention here in the US and on Crash Course, possibly because they present a relatively straightforward narrative and it's easy for the media to cover. But we're not going to focus on media coverage today. No, instead we're going to look at why we have elections in the first place and the institutions and procedures that structure the way elections work in America. We might even compare them to elections in other places. I can make it happen. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of how elections work in the US, it might be a good time to ask a question that rarely is asked. Why do we have elections in the first place? The simple answer is complexity. America is too big and complex to hold public referendums on individual issues, although some states like California try to do it. So instead, we choose representatives. In other words, we vote for people, not policies. Elections are as good a system for holding these representatives accountable as any. Well, at least they're better than violence or public shaming. Political scientists and economists have a more complicated way of describing this in terms of adverse selection. Because why would we want a simple answer when we have political scientists and economists around? But they got to do something. Adverse selection is a problem that can arise when we make a choice that does not necessarily have all the information we need to make that choice. Kind of like when you buy a used car. Elections help to solve this problem because they are ideally competitive. The competition creates incentives for candidates to provide information about themselves and to make most of that information accurate, since their opponent will call them out for any statements that are less than truthful. At least that's what we hope will happen. Elections also supposedly make candidates more accountable, since they provide voters a chance to get rid of bad actors. Of course, it's only worse when elections are competitive, and as we'll see in later episodes, many elections in the US aren't. You might think that since elections are so important to our politics, that they would be featured prominently in the Constitution. But yeah, no. The Constitution does set up a few basic guidelines that structure American elections. But most of the important rules that define the way elections are carried out come out of state laws, legal decisions, and local administrative practices. So what does the Constitution say about elections? Not a lot, as it turns out, except when it comes to choosing the president. President is everything. That's so important. The Constitution does lay out the qualifications for running for federal office, which we already went over in our episode on Congress and the president, and it describes the numbers of representatives and senators. But mostly, the Constitution leaves elections up to the states. Article 1, Section 4 says, the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. But the Congress may at any time, by law, make or alter such regulations, except as to the places of choosing senators. And the Constitution was later changed to allow for direct election of senators with the 17th Amendment. So that last clause doesn't matter so much anymore. The Constitution does say more about the way the president is chosen indirectly through the Electoral College, but the framers messed that up so badly that they had to amend the Constitution after the election of 1800. The 12th Amendment, which basically means that the president and vice president come from the same political party, although it doesn't actually say that, fits the electoral process. Now it's flawless. But it's still indirect, and the qualifications for the electors who choose the president are still left up to the state. Some constitutional amendments also help to structure American elections. The 24th Amendment outlawed poll taxes, which made it easier for poor people to vote. And the 26th Amendment lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. In general, when Congress addresses voting issues, it's to try to expand the pool of voters. Although the Constitution doesn't specify when elections happen, it does give Congress the power to do so, and it requires that the day on which the electors choose the president has to be one single day. This is in Article 2. The Congress may determine the time of choosing the electors and the day on which they shall give their votes, which day shall be the same throughout the United States. Congressional laws also help structure elections by making them more fair. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 set up a number of systems to increase voter participation by minority groups, especially African Americans. And Congress also set up the Federal Election Commission, which has some say over elections. So you should never be able to vote. Eagles. You're gerrymandered out of here. But generally, following the Constitution, most aspects of elections are under the control of the states. State laws define how candidates are nominated and get on the ballot, and they can influence the operation of political parties. State laws also determine registration requirements for voting and set up the location and hours of polling places, which vary a lot from state to state. Probably most important for federal elections, states decide the boundaries of congressional election districts, although not the number of representatives each state has, which is determined by the state's population. We'll talk more about election districts in a future episode. Although this is not always true in every case, as a general rule of thumb, the federal government is more likely to pass laws that expand voting, and states are the governments that restrict voting, especially through registration requirements and taking away the votes from people convicted felonies. One important aspect of American elections that has been set up by state laws is the way that winners have been decided. We like to say that in America, majority rules, but for the most part, this isn't really true, at least as far as elections are concerned. In most states and in most elections, we follow the plurality rule, and this has important consequences for American politics. Let's go to the thought bubble. Under the plurality rule, the candidate with the most votes wins. The number does not have to be a majority, and the more candidates in the race, the less likely anyone will get the majority. Suppose your election has 4 candidates, A, B, C, and D. Candidate A gets 20% of the vote. Candidate B gets 30%. Candidate C gets 25%, and candidate D also gets 25%. That should add up to 100%. It does? Thank goodness. Okay, so no one has a majority here. So who wins? Candidate B, of course, because she has the most votes, 30%. Now you'll notice something about this election that may be a bit of a paradox. The significant majority of voters in this election, 70% in fact, have chosen not B, yet B is the one who wins. This is why we need to be very careful when we say that majority rules, because in many cases it doesn't. But in some...
Okay, hi everyone. So today is a holiday in Korea for the local elections, and to increase voter turnout, of course, some countries like Korea make voting day a holiday. And other countries take even additional policy incentives to encourage people to vote. Like, for example, we talked about how Australia last class had a much more effective COVID response strategy as measured in terms of the casualty rate, the death rate being 1/10 per person what it was in the United States. I did hear on the American radio last week that Australia also requires that everyone vote. Australia actually requires that people vote. If you don't vote, you get fined the equivalent of $20. And Australia turnout in Australian elections is much, much higher than the United States. But I think I recall from years ago studying, of course, other states also have a requirement that you must vote, or you're supposed to vote in elections. You're legally required to vote in elections unless you can demonstrate a reason why. And as I recall, years ago, Italy was one of those countries. But of course, the United States, we do not require that people vote. We do not fine them if they do not vote. Of course, in the 2020 elections, the voter turnout was at 67% of eligible voters voting, which was the highest turnout in 120 years in the United States. Of course, 120 years ago, at the turn of the century, women still could not legally vote in many states in the United States. And Reconstruction, Jim Crow policies had also restricted Black people from voting de facto, if not formally, informally through laws in what we call Jim Crow. So, and we make a big deal about that at the 2020 election with Donald Trump against Joe Biden, that 67% of eligible voters voted. Okay, let's go back to talking about the class today. Today is our short class, and we might have some difference from what had been planned in terms of the organization of today's class, because I'm not certain if Kirill is here. Kirill has stated that he's come back from where he was, and he was been sick. So it looks like we might not have a student debate. We might rather have a traditional classroom debate format rather than a student debate. And so unless Kirill intervenes at some point, we will go with that assumption. Okay, so in terms of also who's here for the debate, let's also sign up for the debate. I mean, let's do this, I should say the smart attendance for the debate. So let me make sure that I'm sharing the screen. And so your smart attendance number is 812. 812 is your smart attendance number. So 812 is your smart attendance number, 812. 812, so you can put that number in. And so now that is finished, we can then go back and then talk about the material for today. Before we go to our debate, we'll give it 20 minutes or maybe more for that. What do I want to talk about today? I mean, of course, I want to relate the reading that you have to current events in the United States and try to update the class reading, which of course was written at the beginning, being written at the beginning of the last year. So it's a bit out of date. Well, not out of date. It's just that it's other developments have happened since then, and we want to talk about that. And so I just saw something today in the New York Times. We've been highlighting how in the United States, the primary elections to determine who will be the candidates in the general election in November are underway in different states in the United States, and that Republican and Democratic primary elections are happening. And of course, a big theme that was really emphasized after the book was published, the Republicans were claiming that the election was stolen. And there's not really much discussion, as I recall, about that in the textbook reading. That leading up to the January 6th, 2021 riot or insurrection or attack on the US Capitol, of course, Donald Trump, the dominant figure in the Republican Party, was insisting and continues to insist that the election was stolen from him due to fraud. But of course, no evidence has been really, presented to prove that. But nevertheless, it's become a mantra, a theme in certain segments of the Republican Party, particularly among those who support Trump. And so the primary elections that are now underway today, or this week, or this summer in the United States have been the first electoral test we've seen about the influence of Trump and his continuing influence in the Republican Party, with, again, his theme that he did not really lose the election. It was stolen from him through fraud by the Democrats or Democratic leaning officials that preferred Joe Biden over him. And keeping in mind, of course, that in these primary elections, typically most voters do not vote. In the primary elections, for example, in Ohio, I think no more than 25% of the eligible voters voted in the primary elections that happened a month ago in Ohio. So 75% didn't vote. But these, of course, these states organize their own primary election system. So Ohio's happened a few weeks ago. Alabama is happening now. And one important figure in the leading up to the January 6, 2021 insurrection attacks in the United States was a Republican member of Congress, Mo Brooks from Alabama. You can see here, Alabama, Republican of Alabama. He is now running for Senate to represent the Alabama in the Senate as one of Alabama's 2 senators. And Alabama is a very red state, very Republican state. So typically the assumption is that whoever wins the Republican primary election in Alabama for the Senate candidate is probably going to win the general election in November, although that cannot be taken for granted. So he, of course, was one of Donald Trump's main supporters and fighters for Donald Trump's claim that January 6th, that the November 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump. And he notes here this spring that he was favored. He was a leading figure in that effort to stop the approval of the election outcome, the certification of the election outcome that gave Joe Biden the victory, so Donald Trump had favored him, but then he was doing badly in the election, in the campaign leading up to the primary that happened last week, a little over 8 days ago in Alabama, and Trump withdrew his endorsement of Mo Brooks to endorse somebody else. But then Mo Brooks came back. Now, why Donald Trump withdrew his endorsement has to do with the fact that Mo Brooks has been appealing to voters to stop focusing so much in the 2020 November election. The November 2020 election that Donald Trump insists he won. And so Donald Trump became very angry with him and withdrew his endorsement of Mo Brooks and endorsed someone else. But in fact, Mo Brooks has recovered after looking like he was going to lose. He came in second in Alabama's Republican primary last week. So nobody got 50% of the votes in the Republican primary, so there has to be a runoff. And that runoff will happen, I assume, sometime very soon. So it says when Brooks placed second in Alabama's Republican primary last week for Senate election, leaving him in a runoff, he said he was not concerned about fraud in his election. If it's a close race, so on. But Brooks was one of the 147 Republican members of Congress who voted on January 6, 2021 to object to the results of the 2020 presidential election. Hundreds more Republican state legislators across the country took similar action in their own capitals. President Joe Biden's victory, they said, was corrupted by either outright fraud or pandemic-related changes to voting. Now, many of those Republicans are accepting the results of their primaries without complaint. Already this year, 55 of the lawmakers who objected in 2020 have run in competitive primaries. Contests conducted largely under the same rules and regulations as those in 2020. None have raised doubts about vote counts. No conspiracy theories about mail ballots have surfaced, and no one has called for a forensic audit or further investigations of the 2020 primary results. So the Republicans are not complaining about fraud in the 2022 elections that are happening now in the primary elections. And so to go on here, But the lack of discussion about fraud in this year's primaries highlights a particular strain of partisanship driving many of the myths about stolen elections. Brooks offered a simple answer as to why he's not worried about his race. There is no fraud in Republican primaries, he said. I'm in a Republican primary, and citizens don't normally vote Republican, and non-citizens normally don't normally vote in Republican primaries, Brooks said. In a Republican primary or Democratic primary, the motivation to steal elections is less because the candidate's philosophy of government differs or minor. So in fact, however, non-citizens do not vote in any federal elections in significant numbers. In Alabama or elsewhere, according to a 2020 report from the Cato Institute, a libertarian think tank, investigators from both parties have unearthed only minuscule numbers of any type of voter fraud. In recent years, the rare instances of broad fraud schemes have become public, have been engineered by Republicans. So in recent years, the rare instances of broad fraud schemes that have become public, those who were engineered by Republicans, including an absentee ballot scheme in North Carolina, that led to the State's Board of Elections to order a redo of a House race in 2018, but that was done by Republicans. So what is going on here? And it goes on to highlight that that again, I think it's the legacy of the foundation of the United States by white European settler colonialism in utilizing institutionalized slavery. That the true Americans, the most pure Americans, are white Americans. And since the Democratic Party has become associated as the party that is for the minorities, that represents minority interests, Black interests, Hispanic interests, Jewish interests, and protection of minority rights from abuse by the white majority, that there's an implicit claim here that that first off, America is a republic, not a democracy. And a republic is a republic because democracies are vulnerable to populist corruption, and that the Republican Party represents the interests of those fundamental values that built America and made the United States the great, powerful country that it is today. Not and of course the legacy of slavery and racial discrimination and dispossession of indigenous territory, that was due to the fact that white European civilization is the source of the strength of the United States, and that made the United States the great power that it is today. And that those fundamental values, as embodied in the American Creed, are to be protected. And they're under threat from other groups represented by people like Barack Obama that are in fact calling for, in effect, socialist policies. Socialist policies that require are the opposite of the American Creed values, that require big government intervention in the economy to bring about social justice. Sometimes it's articulated explicitly in terms of reparations for the systemic racism that Black and brown people, and particularly Black people, formerly the descendants of formerly enslaved people, that they should be compensated because they are disproportionately poor, disproportionately members of the prison system, because they are systemically marginalized and abused and exploited and denigrated and derogated and stereotyped, and policies were implemented to institute that marginalization. But for the Republican Party voter, that's not the fault of white people today. You know, Donald Trump openly kind of expressed this, right? And when he identified those countries for immigrants coming to the United States as quote unquote shithole countries, that the United States has no guilt over its policies because those countries have an inferior culture, an inferior civilization. Now, he doesn't come out and say those words, but that's the implicit. And sometimes others do make those statements. I mean, there were people associated with the Trump administration who did openly say that, you know, when we want refugees, we want European refugees because European civilization is what made America great. And you know, British civilization is part of European civilization. And of course, the legacy of hostility towards, the history of hostility towards Catholics, for example, in the United States. First, the Irish, and then people coming from Southern Europe, Italians and Greek, or Orthodox Christians from Eastern Europe, or Jews from Eastern Europe in particular. But they're all considered white today, even though they weren't considered white often or fully white 150 years ago. and Irish were Catholic Irish were despised by the Anglo-Saxon, British, Scottish settlers of the United States. So there's that an implicit assumption here that some people are more perfect citizens than others. Yeah, okay, Black people are Americans, but they're not. You can't trust them to protect the United States because they are too focused upon what happened 150 years ago, and they are the ones that you can't make it too easy to vote for those people because the people have some responsibility to try to make the effort to vote. I mean, you should study the issues. You should really want to vote to be allowed to vote. You can't make it so easy to vote that anybody can vote who otherwise wouldn't vote because they can't be bothered to go out of their way. That's the implicit subtext. And in other words, there are some people that are more positively American than other people. Yeah, it's a function of systemic racism. Again, I mean, the people that make these points or advocate these policies, they don't come out and openly say, they don't say that they're racist, they deny that they're racist. They point to Black people that they support for office to become president, like Herschel Walker in Georgia, or Black high powerful individuals that are powerful in the American political system, like the Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, that is Black. And they say, we have no problem with those people. Why? Because they have the fundamental American values. They've accepted them, they defend them, they respect them. And if you think and speak and think in the right way, we don't care what color your skin is. Okay, so that's the assumption here that basically, the Democrats, they want to make it easier for people to vote who are a threat to these traditional American creed values that we talked about the last class. And this is a very sensitive topic, right? But it continues to play a role. And again, just to put the United States in comparative context, because you really don't understand the significance of something unless you compare it with something else. You can compare one country with its own history, or you can compare the United States with other countries. But of course, the United States is not the only country where there's a core culture that sets the standards implicitly or explicitly for the ideal values that supposedly the state represents and enforces and rewards, and those behaviors and appearances and values that appear to be a challenge to that core culture. And we talked about this before, maybe in another class. So let me open up, this if I have it here, didn't I? I think I did bring it here somewhere. But what did I do with that? Did I not copy that? Well, I guess maybe I didn't. Let me see. I thought I had it here. Let me see if I can get the file. I think I might have saved it in the wrong file. So let me go find it here. This notion of core culture. So, for example, all states have a core culture. I mean, there's a core culture in Germany. And what is the core culture of Germany? German culture. It's easy to identify those states that have a core culture in that they often have the name of the country that they represent. So, for example, if what is the core culture of Italy? Italian. What is the core culture of France? French. But what is the core culture of Switzerland? Switzerland is a country, is a territory. Is it French culture? Is it German culture? Is it Italian culture? Is it a mix? And it's a little bit harder to identify those cultures in terms of what their supposed core cultures are, because the name is not named after an ethnic group like it is in the case of German or Bulgaria or Greece or Italy or France or Spain, but it's still there. So, for example, and I've talked about this, I think, in the European politics class. So here's a list of countries that have a core culture. So what's the core culture of Argentina? Italian culture. This is the group into which people try to assimilate. Yeah, I know Argentina speaks Spanish, but they even speak Spanish with an Italian accent. Or Brazil. What's the core culture of Brazil? Portuguese. And it's not coincidence that the dominant political class in Brazil are all white people. They look like they could be straight out of Europe. Right, Bolsonaro. I mean, he looks like he's a white European, right? In Mexico too, who becomes president? It's typically people that look like they're right out of Spain or Portugal or Italy or somewhere. Or the core culture of Israel, Ashkenazi Jews. Russia, in the Soviet Union, it was Russia. Now, of course, the core culture of Russia is Russia. But even though, of course, they would deny, Soviet leaders deny that, of course, the Soviet Union is not a Russian state. No, it's a Soviet state. and so on. And so, and the core culture in the United States, of course, is white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and Black people, Hispanic people, African Americans, Hispanics, or tend to be Indian people tend to be stereotyped in this way. So there's patterns that emerge in terms of how people tend to stereotype minority groups in terms of their relationship to the core. And of course, there are advanced groups like Jews that are more economically and socioeconomically influential, more prosperous, and therefore more influential, that are looked upon in Europe and the United States with envy. That these people, they don't act and behave like good Americans, quote unquote, yet they have all this money and power and influence, and it's not fair. Envy is the emotion that this group has in stereotyping, the anti-Semitic stereotype towards this group, that these people have something that B wants, that B views they have without, that they do not deserve, that they gain that power and influence unfairly. So they're viewed with envy. Envy is the feeling I have towards you when you have something I want and I feel like you got it in an unfair way. You don't act like us, and you should act like us because America belongs to these people, B. And that's the core of the Republican Party today. That's what Mo Brooks and the Stop the Steal movement are appealing to. Even though they come out and say, yeah, we're racist, they don't say that. That these people, and of course, they stereotype these people in terms of the anti-Semitic stereotype, and you can see this elsewhere in other countries as well. This is fascinating, by the way. This is why I got into political science, nationalism, and identity. You see these patterns across the whole planet. So yeah, Jews in Europe and the United States are stereotyped, the anti-Semitic stereotype, right? And what is the anti-Semitic stereotype? These people are aggressive, that they care only about money, that they're pushy, that they're in-group oriented. They don't care about anybody else but themselves. And in terms of wartime, this can be really dangerous because these people are viewed as not really loyal. They're not loyal in the stereotype to America or to Germany or to Poland or to France in the Dreyfus affair. No, they're loyal to themselves. And during wartime, this can lead to genocide because they can easily be stereotyped as agents of an external power. The way these people talk about George Soros, right? And of course, these people are stereotyped. Again, in terms of Southeast Asia, Chinese minority in Indonesia and Malaysia are stereotyped, and in the Philippines are stereotyped this way because they tend to dominate the business environment in Malaysia, Indonesia, and elsewhere. Armenians also in the Middle East. These groups are stereotyped in terms of pattern stereotype, in terms of being lazy and childlike, right? That they don't like to work. The way Bulgarians view gypsies, the way Europeans tend to view gypsies, Roma, that they're lazy, they're like children. They don't want to work, they like to play, they're dirty, that they're uncivilized, that like you have to make a child take a bath when a child doesn't want to take a bath. These people they're dirty, right? And in terms of when they become a threat, they become seen as thieves, that they'll steal from you, right? And today in the Republican Party tends to represent de facto this group, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, and the stereotype, the Democratic Party stereotype is representing these, tending to disproportionately reflect the interests and influence of these two groups. And so Kurds in the Middle East are stereotyped this way. It's Kurds in Turkey, Kurds in Iraq, right, as backward. And of course, that they need to be civilized, and they need to be civilized by these people. And of course, again, in this conspiratorial stereotype, that these people will tend to view, these militant nationalists in this group will tend to view these people as manipulating these people for their, in order to undermine these people, right? And so you hear, among militant white nationalists back in the 1990s, the Zionist occupational government, the ZOG, the ZOG. The Jews are manipulating these people to undermine these people so that they can pollute these people and dominate the world through their domination of the globe through the majority of the population in the world being non-white. And so that's the subtext. And, you see it in the United States today in terms of the behavior in politics. So I just wanted to make sure to cover that. But in terms of the we have to make sure we have at least 20 minutes for the debate. So only like 5 minutes left in this discussion. So we covered the notes fully for the chapter at the last class. So what I want to do is I want to go back and talk about the different models that emerge in terms of people's perceptions of how governments make policy. And I was talking about stereotypes and models of how people understand the government behaves and acts. And I wanted to talk a bit about how we understand the public policy making process in countries like the United States in terms of political science textbook. And there are three general, I would say, paradigms or worldviews in terms of explaining how governments make policy. And we can put these three different paradigmatic perspectives in three different groups. One paradigmatic perspective is that governments make public policy through interest groups, through people forming organizations to lobby and pressure on behalf of their economic interests, as potato farmers or wheat farmers or dairy farmers or steel manufacturers or oil and gas producer companies or I mean, infinite number of interest groups that they form and to organize and coordinate their resources to pressure and lobby governments to act on their behalf. And so whatever the public policy issue might be, greenhouse gas emissions, right? Of course, the oil and gas company has strong views on that. So do interest groups that focus on environmental protection, and other interest groups focused upon indigenous rights to protect their territory from exploitation from oil and gas companies, right? And public policies formed as a result of the struggle of these different interest groups of different political influence, a big and small influence over different candidates. And basically, public policy is the result of summing the vectors of all these interest groups struggling and pushing and fighting. And when you add up, when you add up the vectors, and you sum the vectors like you do in physics class, force equals mass times acceleration, you get a general summation of all these political forces of represented by different interest groups pushing, and you sum up those forces, and the outcome is policy, right? And government is like passive. Government is like an adding machine, a cash register. It's just a place where all these interest groups come together, struggle and fight with each other to pressure and lobby government officials and regulators to act in certain ways. Then there's also the elite approach, that there's this hidden group of people that hide behind government officials that really are pulling the strings, that really dominate and control the political system. And this group approach, this is the dominant approach in political science in the United States in terms of explaining how the United States acts, the group approach. But then there are these other approaches like the elite approach, that there's really a group of powerful elites at the very top that hide behind these government officials that pretend to be who in charge, but really there's an elite, a power elite. And the most important representatives of this perspective is C. Wright Mills. And C. Wright Mills died a long time ago, but in his book, The Power Elite, is still required reading in graduate school in the United States. All right. And he argued that, yeah, these people, they tend to be ruling families. The Bushes, the Kennedys, the Gores, the Tafts in Ohio, the Clarks in Pennsylvania, and they tend to dominate the political system. And they might let these people have their say every once in a while, but really they ultimately get whatever it is they want. And these people that argue the elite approach, they hate these people because they say this is all BS. This is all brainwashing. There's a lot of people that are okay, let me talk about the third approach. That's the class approach. And of course, the most important representative of the class approach to politics is Karl Marx. And in this approach, the ruling elite, there is a ruling elite, but the ruling elite doesn't rely so much upon deceptions, it relies upon brute force. It controls the police, it controls the army, it controls the prison system, and it uses coercion, violence, by controlling the state to control the lower socioeconomic classes. So this is less hidden. There's some overlap, obviously, between the elite approach and the class approach, because Antonio Gramsci was a neo-Marxian theorist who wanted to explore how it is that these people persuade the working classes not to resist, that the working classes get brainwashed, basically. They get brainwashed by the school system, by the advertising system, by the media, by the entire structure of socialization to cause workers and peasants not to see and understand what are their objective class interests. So there is overlap between the two, but there's still, it's worthwhile highlighting that historically there was more of a focus on brute force, naked force to control people and the elite. And of course, the danger of this elite approach is that it goes off into conspiracy theories, that there's a group of bankers, for example, that's controlling the governments and the economy of the world, or George Soros and or QAnon. I mean, sometimes it goes nuts, but it's still always there, this approach. And so I guess we're running out of time in our short class, but just to highlight how the class approach understands that, well, I don't think I have an image. We don't really have much time in the short class to go into the details. So I think what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and have our class debate back on this notion of whether or not the Senate, South Korea would be better off if it had a second body in the legislature, a second house, to a Senate, like a Senate type process body like in the United States. And so we will just have a class debate on this topic. So let me then go back to the to the breakout rooms and ask you to form into breakout rooms. So of course, I'm doing this off my classroom computer, so it's a lot easier to do this. So let me let you, well, let me assign automatically and then move you around. So rename this as pro and then rename this as con, and ask you if you want to stay in the room that you've been assigned. So Micah, are you happy in being with pro? Micah?
Yes.
Okay, Sales, Juliet, are you pro or con? And Kim Pyong-ku, are you happy with being pro or con?
I'm pro.
Okay, you're pro. Kim Pyong-ku, are you happy with being pro?
I'm con.
Okay, so let me move you to con. And Anais, are you pro or con?
I'm con.
Okay, Chung Do-jin, are you pro or con?
I'm pro.
Okay, so I'll move you to pro. And okay, so there we go. So open all the rooms, and so please join the rooms. Join. And pro, who will speak first for Chung Do-jin or Micah or Juliet for pro, and Anais join con, Kim Pyong-gu join con, Cho Jin join con. I think Cho Jin, you are con, right? So let me flip a coin, and the person that is heads will speak as the person at the bottom. They will speak first for the group. So let me flip a coin, and if it's heads, it's the person at the bottom of the list. And it's heads, so that means Juliet will speak first for pro, and Cho Jin will speak first for con. So please prepare your statements. You wrote your paragraphs. You are ready to go on this topic. And so we'll give you each a chance to make your statement and respond to each other, so you get some practice with the English language. And of course, pro goes first. So Juliet, you're going to speak first, Juliet. So everybody help Juliet prepare to make her opening statement. And so I have to flip a coin to decide if I'm pro or con as well. So heads, I am pro. And so let me flip this coin. Heads, I am pro. And I am con. See, it was tails. The number is always a con. So I am con on the statement. So I will write a con statement as well to prepare to make my statement. And so you've got 60 seconds. Okay. I'm trying to finish my statement here. Okay. Okay. So Juliet, go. Juliet, read your statement. Unmute. Go, Juliet. Go.
Um, so I think that South Korean should have a second chamber because I mean obviously it's a better chance to have the opposition speaking, because if one house is the same party than the president, the other can have a chance to be a majority with so the opposition. So I think it's a better way to have everybody express their opinion. But on the other hand, if there is a second house, it could still be it could still be the majority of the president, and then the opposition wouldn't have any chance to like express itself. So I'd say I'm pro, because I'm used to like this system with two chambers, but in then I think I'm more neutral about it.
Okay. Chojin Khan. Chojin.
Yes. Wait a minute, please. I think the South Korea, so South Korea, the South Korea above this is different, unlike the above two countries. South Korea has a centralized political appearance rather than the regional autonomous part. In particular, centralized methods are more efficient in Korea because major political and economic sector are formed around Seoul, not in each region, such as Germany and the United States. Moreover, in Korea, the centralized method is more efficient as major political and economic field are formed around Seoul, not in each region, such as Germany and the United States. So I think the introduction of the biochemical system is not appreciated for Korea.
Okay. And so heads Chung Do-jin, tails Micah Balinsky. And it is tails. So Micah Balinsky, go for pro, Micah.
So I said that I kind of compared the sides of, well, the advantages and disadvantages between a unicameral and a bicameral system. So generally, it can be said that with a unicameral legislature, South Korea may be more efficient in making policy and lawmaking decisions, because there's only one house and passing legislation takes less time. However, in a bicameral legislature, the bill must be enacted by both houses in parliament in order to become an act. So by operating in a unicameral system, not all social groups and industries are provided with a voice, taking away from aspects of democracy and representation. So I believe that in a bicameral system would be more democratic. And if the Republic of Korea would like to include more democratic processes, they should consider a bicameral legislature.
Kenkuya, next will be Anais is heads, Kim Pyong-ku is is tails, and it is Kim Pyong-ku. Go Kim Pyong-ku for Khan.
First of all, the biggest reason is that there's no state like the United States. And its reason that constitute Korea is sufficiently within the scope of unexpected problems and does not have a large area of land like United States. And the introduction of the bicameral system can further increase the process and increase prudence in the legislative process. And in addition, the introduction of a bicameral system has the advantage of being able to hear the voices of local governments more. But I think this kind of advantage is unnecessary because it is a structure that can be sufficiently responsible for the composition of the parliament of the Korea. Yeah.
Okay, and that leaves Chung Do-jin for pro. Chung Do-jin, make your pro statement.
Yes. I think the South Korean legislature should be in the form of bicameral, and it also lead its democracy would further improve. So if the Korean peninsula's reunification might happens, the bicameral system would be the material for effective negotiation between two Koreas. The two Koreas have a long history of the system confrontation. So if one side tries to gain the upper hand in the united legislature system, the other side will surely protest about that. So, and it's like in the case of United States, the reason why the Senate is created was that the state between the states, they have conflicts to reflect their interest in the Senate. So the compromisation is that each state sends the two representatives in the state. So it was the most appropriate agreement in the negotiation process. Following, so by applying this case to the Korean Peninsula, both sides can compromise by distributing seats in the unified might be Senate in the new in proportion to their administrative districts. And even if the reunification of the Korean Peninsula is faced with a realistic impossibility, so if it doesn't happen, the opening one more parliament will serve as an opportunity to enhance democratic representation, and it would, and in the case of United States, the party that won the presidential election didn't always have the upper hand in the Senate, because some voters who wanted to go by split ticket voting. However, so South Korea has has a similar political landscape such as the United States, with a superiority of two major parties higher than that of minority ones. But the difference is South Korea only has the one legislative system so far, which is a unicameral. Therefore, the tyranny of the majority through a straight ticket voting in Korea's unicameral legislature could be expressed as a serious damage to democracy itself. So although the bicameral system itself is not completely able to prevent these attempts, like the 2020 presidential election in the United States, the 80% of voters decided on a straight ticket voting. But it is clear that the check effect will be stronger than that of the former unicameral system.
Okay, Anais, you are Khan. Anais, please make your Khan statement, Anais.
Yes, I was calm because of how the US Senate is today. I don't think it's equal and fair that there's not like equal amount of Democrats and Republicans seats. And also the fact that despite someone being a Republican, they have also to follow their states if it's Democrats. It's like the example we have seen in class with Senator Kristen Sinema. So I think that, yeah, like if it happens in South Korea, the power will not be divided equally and the states have too much power for now.
Okay, all right. So Juliet, do you have a response to do a second round? Do you have a response to Anais or anyone else from Khan as to what they are arguing? Do you have a rebuttal, Juliet?
Well, not really.
And what about Micah? Do you have a response to Anais or Kim Pyong-koo or Jo Jin?
I don't. I actually thought their arguments made perfect sense. So
Micah!
I might be converted.
Oh no! And what about Chung Do-jin? Do you have a response to Anais or Kim Pyong-koo or Jo Jin? Chung Do-jin.
Yes. Their statements were very interesting. So, well, I don't have anything to statement now.
Okay, Cho Jin, do you have any response to Anais or to anything to add? Cho Jin. Or Kim Pyong-koo, do you have anything to add to Anais? Anything to add, Kim Pyong-koo?
No, nothing.
Oh, okay. Well, then let's go back to the cyber campus and go back to vote. And oh, it hasn't logged me out. And I have to make some changes here because there is the we have okay. So who won the debate? So let me don't vote. Don't vote. So let me edit this and let me see. Yeah, I gotta remove some things here. Okay, so okay, so let me save that. So please vote. Oh, I forgot to make it anonymous. Let's make it non-anonymous. Okay, now vote. Vote on who won the debate. Pro or con? Please vote. Please vote. Please vote. Please vote. And you have 1 minute left to vote. Well, actually, well, it looks like nobody's voting pro. Only three people voting con. Oh, there we have a vote for pro. And let's see who else. Anybody else going to vote? You have until 10 o'clock, but that's 10 minutes. So, okay, so there's 5 people. Anybody else want to vote? And if nobody else is going to vote, well, I'll let you choose. So,
I have a question.
yes.
What about the other votes? Because there's, I think, 14 more options to
No,
vote.
we didn't do
so-
those votes at the last class. So,
Okay.
But that reminds me also, your final exam first draft is due Saturday, so that I can write comments on it and send it back to you. And then very soon, I'm going to ask you to sign up for a debate, sign up for a conference session with me to talk about that. So like we did with the midterm. Okay, that's it for now. So I'm going to end the class. All right. Any other questions? If not, bye.